Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Brock Beard from LastCar.info. Welcome back to Behind the Wall here this evening. And before we get too much further, again, big thanks everyone for your support of 500 Days. The fourth episode released just this week, the longest week, posted on the 11th. Definitely got a lot to talk about with that video, as well as the related news, including Kevin Harvick's announced retirement at the end of the 2023 season. I guess we got some new news coming through here about who may be in the Daytona 500 next year. Lots of things to certainly go over, and we'll touch upon about that tonight here. So yeah, again, big thanks everyone. We had a great turnout on part 4 of this series, and I really thought that I wasn't sure what to expect from this first episode, this fourth episode of the series. Especially since the third one ended right before Dale Earnhardt's accident. I figured I was kind of expecting the results were going to be kind of mixed. And I certainly expected that, you're probably going to have people that just aren't going to be willing to see it. And I'm sure that that's still the case in some cases here. But I was very surprised by how positive the response was from people who did see the video there. So again, big thanks to you guys on that. I think it's even performed even better than the first 3, which I certainly didn't expect. This one, like I said, came together very late in the process. It wasn't originally part of the initial plan. I mean, the initial plan was just to do the silly season deal. And then the 2 episodes after that kind of came together by the summer, and part 4 I didn't even start doing the research on it really until September of last year. And then that ended up being the rest of the project there. So, yeah, I was nervous going into that one in particular. It's always nervous before you premiere one of these videos because you just don't know what the response is going to be. Yeah, no, again, thank you so much for your guys' support on it. Again, and I think, I mean, if this were something I was aiming to do from the beginning of it, I'm not sure if I would have approached it the same way, or maybe it would have been too really challenging to kind of pursue it. But the momentum of the events from February 2001 and the anticipation going into the Daytona 500, how much excitement built up through the race itself, it really felt at that point that really kind of had to talk about Rockingham and what happened at that point there. And ultimately, as I announced at the end of the video, I am now planning on extending 500 Days to cover the rest of the 2001 season. And originally a race-by-race format is the plan. I said originally 34 episodes. It may actually end up being, I believe, 36, depending on how it goes there. Obviously, it was a 36-race season. We've done the first 2 races, but you got the All-Star race. I don't know how I'm going to do things to the championship. Things are a little bit more plastic in that sense because I haven't really firmly set up what I'm going to be doing for the full series here. I have some ideas for definitely the next couple of episodes here, but I figure that's just going to come. It's definitely not going to be something that is going to be done entirely this year. It's certainly not going to be something that's going to be done in these next couple of weeks. It was great to be able to do a series of videos and get them up these last 4 consecutive weeks here. But yeah, the Las Vegas episode is still in production, so it is not going to be available next week, and the advanced access for the Patreon is not started yet. But again, we're going to really kind of get work done on that, and I think the other goal that I had with this, especially when we had the issues with the Stanton Barrett episode for Rise of the Field Fillers last year, which really kind of started all this. I was doing this video, and when it was going to be a shorter video to kind of fill that gap, because the Barrett video was clearly going to take a lot more time than I expected. And then ultimately this just kind of took over completely by September. Hopefully these episodes are something that will be a little bit, I wouldn't say easier to produce, because it's certainly challenging subject matter, and I want to do it as comprehensively as possible to make sure that it matches with the precedent set from these first 4 episodes. But in terms of like setting up interviews for the field fillers thing, that's definitely turned out to be a bit more of a challenge with these last couple episodes. Even the Hermie Sadler one as well. You may recall that one was delayed pretty well too. So the thinking is to definitely have 500 Days ongoing. And those would be basically posted in between upcoming episodes of the Field Fillers. As it happens, the next video I post is probably going to be another Field Fillers episode there too. So that's going to be the situation with that. So yeah, so we're going to get that going there. And I think that'll be a good way to approach it there. So that way, and then also, be able to produce some more consistent content. I like doing the driver profiles. A lot of those are kind of dependent on interviews too. And they just take it just takes a lot of work to put them together, even more so than these here. And I think that that's going to be something that's going to be able to be a little bit more sustainable this year too. And again, that's kind of, I posted this in the Patreon, and I'll go ahead and discuss it here on the show tonight. This is another reason I've kind of scaled back a little bit on the race coverage this year. In terms of the trackside coverage, they were going down to just 3 races this year. We're not going to do the Clash this season. I would have loved to. We actually had a scheduling conflict with that. There's the reason we had to cancel. In fact, I got to still, I bought a ticket for Last Pro, and I still need to sell that. So if anybody's interested in going to the Clash and needs a ticket, let me know. I may publicize that a little bit later on. I wasn't sure whether to go through SeatGeek or whatever. But we're going to do Fontana in February, Sears Point in June, and then the championships at Phoenix, especially with the news here about Kevin Harvick retiring from the full-time competition in the Cup Series this season. Definitely want to be there for that too. So those are the races we're looking at in terms of the trackside coverage. The week-to-week coverage for LASCAR is going to remain the same. Arbin Schneider actually had an article about the Michael Andretti Formula One controversy that was just posted earlier today. So we're starting to get kind of more content on there as the season starts. The first article I'm going to do this year will be the entry list article for the Busch Clash. That'll be coming up next month. So that's going to be what we're kind of looking at here. And it's possible maybe we add some more races later this season. We'll see how things work out there. But again, big thanks everybody for supporting the video. Huge thanks to those of you who joined the Patreon. We've had still a steady number of people joining there. I hope they're enjoying the content on the site. And again, their support really helps a lot. Not only does it help offset the cost of doing the trackside coverage there, covering the travel expenses and so forth, but also like licensing fees for the music that I use in the videos, definitely making sure they get paid for their work as well. In particular, the Roman Senek music and Sergio Productions that were absolutely essential in this. And, I think in part 4 in particular, I know there's a lot less music in that one, but I really wanted to kind of do that on purpose. I wanted that kind of just, again, it's really hard to capture the feeling of that particular week between everything that happened from the end of the Daytona 500 through Rockingham. But that music track there, I believe it's called The Heaven's Path by Roman Senek Productions there. I mean, just great music on that. And I noticed a lot of people responded, very much to that, definitely during the video. And so I'm glad it came across the way it did there. And that's going to be kind of the challenge going forward in covering these other races, because some of them are definitely more publicized than others. If you think about the 2001 season, obviously, especially with the news with Harvick, you think about the Spring Atlanta race where Harvick won his first event, Dale Jr.'s win in the July race at Daytona, coming back there to pull off the victory and the dramatic victory lane celebrations that came from that. You had the championship battle that was going on. Jeff Gordon and Ricky Rudd were big factors in that one. And then obviously after the atrocities that occurred in September, you have the events that took place at Dover, NASCAR's first race back after those attacks. So it's a lot to go through. Certainly it felt like that experiencing it firsthand, as a fan those many years ago. But I think the momentum trying to get that ready for publication. One thing I'm working on this weekend actually is the audiobook, which will coincide with the final edits that I want to do on there to make sure everything flows pretty well. The audiobook, much like with the second edition of the J.D. McDuffie book, is going to be voiced by myself, so I'm going to have that available when the book is published. I still don't have a publication date yet. That's going to depend on, again, what I'm working with the editor and also the cover designer there to kind of get all that coordinated. I'd like to have it out by the summer at the latest if possible, but that's kind of up in the air too, which is another reason that we kind of kept the race schedule pretty elastic this season. And again, certainly if it turns out a certain race or something like that is a great opportunity to promote the book, I think that would be a good opportunity there too. So we'll see what's going on that end. But definitely with the news this week, certainly didn't plan on this, obviously. I mean, starting this series in mid-December. Kevin Harvick, very outspoken this last season about the safety of these cars, the crappy parts meme that he started at Darlington after the very scary incident that he had during the Southern 500 with the fire that was coming through his car there. And I remember remarking at the time, it's like his words about safety should have that much extra weight given the fact of how exactly his Cup Series career started. It literally did just from part 4 there. From being, his debut was going to be in Atlanta and an expansion team for the Childress effort, and then that gets moved up and ultimately getting put in not only Dale Earnhardt's car, but Dale Earnhardt's car that won Atlanta the previous spring, the photo finish with Bobby Labonte. So, pressure just, magnified that much more. And I hope that came across well in the video of just how he was handling those circumstances. It's amazing, what he was dealing with. And of course, Harvick has been very outspoken on this, especially I believe on Dale Jr.'s podcast. He provided more context about this too. But that was, it was just so much more a part of that experience that week, and the questions about what was going to happen. I mean, other drivers that have been in similar situations, you think of Jimmy Hensley, taking over for Alan Kulwicki after his plane crash in 1993. You think of Robbie Gordon, who stepped in for Davey Allison a couple weeks after his helicopter crash in 93. Jeff Purvis coming back with the Phoenix Racing after Neil Bonnet's accident. Many drivers that, really struggled really in a lot of those starts. Didn't, couldn't have as much success, but it was in part because it was just such a difficult circumstance. And that's what I think makes Harvick's story so exceptional, is that under even greater strain, and undeniably, Dale Earnhardt being, just a tremendous figure, and his loss being as massive as it was, how Harvick was able to perform, even that 14th place finish in the Rockingham race, which was no guarantee given the fact that he had qualified badly. He'd run in the Xfinity Series there. He'd had some experience on that track, but not an easy track to make your debut on at all. I'm trying to remember. I think Ricky Rudd might have made his debut at that track and done well, but it's very rare. It's like making your debut at like a place like Darlington. Like if you was somebody these days, it would be like trying to do it at, at any Cup track. We saw what happened with Ty Gibbs last year. Thankfully in a situation where it wasn't a fatality that he was taken over for. But after Kurt Busch's concussion, the challenge of running at Pocono, and very similarly, the fact that Ty had run at Pocono before as an Xfinity Series driver, but with like very little to no experience in the Cup car there. I think that's probably the closest we've had to that, at least in recent years here, to experience. And in Harvick's case, unlike Ty Gibbs, Ty Gibbs this last year actually dropped to the back of the field and let the rest of the field pull away and kind of got his feet under him there during that race. Kevin Harvick was right in the middle of it, with rain on the approach and the challenges that were coming down the way, and then having to make the adjustments again the next day with the weather change and the weather was suddenly clear and trying to figure that out. It was a challenge for a lot of the other teams. You see a lot of other teams in that race really struggle to make that adjustment and suddenly weren't factors. Michael Waltrip, for example, had a good run at the very beginning of it, and then things didn't quite work out towards the end of it there. So again, just a remarkable story, and I think it really adds to Harvick's aspect there too. But also, certainly all of this within the context, of course, about the loss of Dale Earnhardt and how profoundly that was felt. Like Marty Smith had an interview once where he said that the words that Mike Helton spoke that night in the Daytona Media Center were impossible. Like it was an impossible thought. And I know that may seem incredible given what was happening in the 2000 season and the tragedies of Adam Petty, Kenny Irwin, and Tony Roper during that season. But I think it really is another measure of how intense the anticipation was for that race, that it kind of pushed a lot of that aside, unfortunately. And, people didn't really start thinking about it a lot more, or really to the degree that they really had to, until after that accident. And you hear a lot of those reports that were posted by, you had everybody from Tom Brokaw to CNN to Fox News and everybody in between that are covering this story about Dale Earnhardt. And they're making this point like, wait a minute, he's the fourth driver in 9 months to have a basilar skull fracture. And then understanding, this whiplash motion in the car, and talking about the Hans device and how much, attention that was getting. It's like this, that very much should have been there in 2000 already. It was already an extreme circumstance back then. But somehow, it was just, it took something that much bigger, that much more awful, really. In every sense of the term, to get the discussion out there. But as you can see from the video, it wasn't like everybody came to Rockingham and was wearing a Hans device. You still had drivers like Ricky Rudd and others who were very much questioning, how comfortable it was, and not being happy with it. You had the Hutchins device, which was being embraced by some drivers. Stacey Compton was among them. I believe Dale Jr. was wearing it as well. And you had the issue was not settled. It was really kind of the beginning of a really serious discussion about this. And so that was very much that kind of situation there in that. So it's and the other part of it from that video too, undeniably, when you and the big reason, I think the thing that helped that video perform a little bit better was understanding why I ended it where I did. And stopping just short of the accident, like the first, note where you hear people react, but you don't know what they're reacting to quite yet. Just bring it up to that moment. Everything that happened from that moment onward, including that last moment off of the corner there, is a completely different sea change of what was happening at that point. Because this really was. And I also want to make sure that that's the case for people to see that from part 3 to part 4, if they watch it or if they rewatch it, to note that massive difference, that this was a really tremendously exciting 500. And it's okay to certainly be that excited about it. It was exciting reliving the moments up to that point in the video. And remembering how competitive that aerodynamic package was and how well it worked at Daytona. And you had all these people making these crazy moves, and undeniably how safe it was. It was dangerous, certainly, but the safety in terms of not having a lot of accidents, even to the point that Dale Earnhardt's own crew chief, Kevin Hamlin, noticed this and believed that this was like the next step in Daytona, and trying to make it even more exciting than it had ever been, and certainly bringing that excitement to fever pitch. And this builds on part 2, of course, where Ken Squire, again, people that are not newcomers to the sport, even though Fox was coming on board to start broadcasting these races, talking about how much more exciting this was during the 2000 season. And don't forget, Dale Earnhardt wasn't happy with the 2000 aero package either. Certainly he was, out of his own interest, for sure. He was struggling in that race, just like a lot of the other Chevrolet teams in particular were, because they just had nothing for the Fords. But it was a tremendously exciting Daytona 500. And much like Michael Waltrip describes in his blink of an eye thing, once that accident happened, it just opened just a tragedy that was just as massive. And the reverberations of it were just as huge. You got reporters that are pointing the finger this way and that way, and talking about, you had these doctors, these trauma specialists, talking about NASCAR making the sport more exciting, and the cost of that danger, the cost of how tremendous, that competition was, and ignoring, or at least not paying as much attention to the safety aspect of it there. The rhetoric expressed by many people in that sense. And then, of course, on top of this, you have a lot of fans that are looking for a scapegoat, whether it was Sterling Marlin for the contact between Marlin and Earnhardt there in the final corner, whether it was Bill Simpson, the manufacturer of the seatbelt, and NASCAR presenting in isolation information about this seatbelt being found in 2 pieces, and without any further context about how that could have happened, or and not providing any information. It almost seems like maybe they should have revealed that after they had like more information along the way. It felt like, I guess they felt like they had to disclose something before the Rockingham race. But obviously a full investigation into the accident wasn't going to be completed in just that 1 week. I mean, if you think about the way a lot of serious investigations are handled, if you think about like an NTSB investigation, for example, reports on those aren't produced for a long time, and it was very much the case with the Earnhardt report. I believe it was August when they finally had their findings of a full-on investigation into the accident and what they believed had caused the fatal injury. So it's an interesting look back at it because, and again, much like I'm expressed in 3 Before February, there's this narrative that, okay, it was Dale Earnhardt had this accident, and then boom, NASCAR just jumped right in and they took care of all of this, and they mandated the Hans device, and they immediately started putting up safer barriers, and like that gap of time was a bit longer than that. And there's 2 ways to look at that. I mean, on the one side, much like with the report, it wasn't going to happen overnight. Although with the Hans device, I mean, they could have very easily just said, look, we're going to do this. Safer barriers and stuff, that was going to take a lot more time in that sense. But just taking some stance in that way. And there were other articles I didn't show in the video there that were, the rhetoric expressed in there was much more aggressive and much more frustrated with the lack of an action. You remember the Larry Woody article that I cited in 3 Before February about the discussion about safety kind of falling into the background with the Daytona anticipation. And I think he expressed that perfectly. It rung tragically true for an article that was written 10 days before Earnhardt's accident. I think that's definitely one part to look at it there. So, but undeniably, it is such the transition between that real exciting Daytona 500 and the series of realizations really about the magnitude of the loss of Dale Earnhardt during that week. It's so hard to express that. I don't think even in these videos you can fully show it. I mean, I tried to present this in such a way to bring you about as close as you can to it, because I mean, obviously we have the benefit of hindsight, these days, and kind of you see a lot of these clips and you see it in a different context. But to think about like watching that race as it happens, not knowing what was going to happen at the very end of it, and then to have that transition there. It is just the way Michael Waltrip put it, to have the highest of highs, like this tremendous thrill of Michael Waltrip winning his first race in his 463rd start, and the fact that so much had changed in the sport during that time period, and Michael had struggled for so long. Even Bill France Jr. being very clear in that, and then to suddenly all at once, you had this accident happen. Didn't seem like it was that serious. But then the announcement comes out that night, and as I described in the video, it's not that time slowed down or stopped. It felt like time was still going. I remember just sitting gobsmacked in front of the TV that night, and they just said the same thing. They had no other information. All they would just say is like he died on the last lap of the Daytona 500. They'd show the wreck. They'd talk to somebody that was standing outside the medical center, outside the track. They show the graphic, they play a different kind of music, and then they just go back to the beginning again and just play and the same clips of Dr. Steve Bohannon and everything. And that was a lot of the week. I mean, it was, and then during the week, you get a little bit more be added to it. You had the fans that were appearing at DEI and the other shops there and setting up tributes there. And then leading up ultimately to the Earnhardt family agreeing to a celebration of life that Fox got to, do what must have been one of, I mean, I can't even imagine how difficult that broadcast was for all of Fox, really. But in particular, Ken Squire and Mike Joy to MC this basically in a sense. And, just to handle that, all of this. And I think, It's very bizarre from that one article that expressed a frustration with how fans were responding to the loss of Earnhardt at Rockingham, and comparing it to the response to Ayrton Senna in 1994 at Monaco the following week after the Imola accident. When I think for most fans around at that time, and it certainly was for me, was when you got to Rockingham. That was the first real realization that it's like, oh my God, it's real. Like, he's really not there. Like his motor coach isn't there. His car is not there. His team's there, but they got somebody else in the car. And that's when I think that's when it didn't feel real. And I think there was still that little bit of denial. And I described that in my trailer as well. I remember thinking that very clearly when the race started. I had that. I'm not even a big Earnhardt fan. I really wasn't. That was more Last Bros thing. He was much more into him than I was. I was more of a Ricky Rudd, Jerry Nadeau guy. Certainly back then, and even back then, I liked the smaller teams. But I remember thinking it's like, oh well, he missed the start, but he'll get back out there. Like it was a last place thing or something, or some guy that just had a mechanical issue and couldn't start the race. I remember having that thought, and I remember just pushing that aside of them. I was like, no, that's stupid. This is real. This is it. This is what happened. And I think for fans that fell out of the sport, it was probably that moment that probably either pulled them out of the sport permanently, or they really had to kind of step aside from it for a long time.